So we are talking about Vladimir Georgievich Sorokin, who indeed has turned 65, sorry, this year. I assume that you know about him and you have read his major works, and I'm not going to read his biography. I just put this slide on the screen so that you could review whatever is interesting for you. But what is strange for me, I have been writing about Sorokin for many years, and he always was among the sort of experimental group of writers who are by default considered to be young ones. And now he's 65, and I just for the comparison checked Tolstoy's timeline, and Tolstoy at 65 is in his late phase, and he has already written all his major novels. I hope that it's not the case of Sorokin. He's in the excellent working form, and I'm pretty sure that he will do many other incredible things in the future. But it still invites certain reflections on the path that he has come by today, and what he has achieved already as the writer and as a thinker, I would dare say. So just simple and very much imprecise statistics. We can say that he by today he is the author of 13 novels, right? And you can see the list. I didn't list The Month in the Howl because I don't think it's a novel. I think it's a long story or novella, maybe. Right. Then he authored 6 collections of short prose, and although the fonts here are smaller than on the previous slide, I want to emphasize that I think that Sorokin's short prose is as important, maybe even more important, than his novels. In fact, he uses his short prose as the lab for his novels, and typically some radical turn in his work happens after the collection of new short stories, right? And you can see it by comparing the dates of the novels and the dates of his short stories. So he uses short stories to test new grounds, to test new effects. Not all of them would go into the novels, but what happens is that all his novels, typically, with the exception probably of 1 or 2, consist of short stories. They are easily broken into the episodes that may be pretty separate from each other. And these short stories, they constitute the sort of plot of the novel, but basically it is the novel in novellas, right? And that's Sorokin's peculiar response to the time when the novel is in decline as a genre. When, as we know, the novel requires the time when synthesis can be done, and Sorokin's time is the time of analysis, the time of disintegration of previously existing monolithic constructions in culture and society. So just right now, he published the most idiosyncratic book, Russian Folk Proverbs and Idioms. Of course, all these Russian folk proverbs and idioms are composed by Vladimir Georgievich Sorokin, and I can only wonder what new turn it promises in his prose. But Sorokin is not only a prose writer, as you can see, he is a very much prolific playwright. And it is an amazing fact that we do not recognize him as a playwright, although he had created multiple dramas which are very dynamic and which combine his linguistic experimentation with the stunning visual imagery, right? And no wonder that from plays, only a few of them have been produced, by the way, he moved to the films, and he wrote several film scripts. And you can see that at least 4 films have been based on his scripts. He also is working in the strange genre of, okay, not strange, traditional, great genre, fantastic genre, but very rare, rarely explored by contemporary writers, genre of opera librettos. We all remember famous production of Rosenthal Children at the stage of Bolshoi Theater and music of Leonid Desyatnikov. But his recent book that is titled Триумф времени и бесчувствия, if you can see it, it has 3 more librettos, and I don't remember seeing any significant critical reflection of Sorokin's work in this genre. So Sorokin is much larger than what we know about him, and it is a little wonder that he is steadily getting into the English language market. So you can see the list of his books that have already been translated into English, and the majority of them have been translated by the late Jamie Gambrell, who tragically died last year. But to my knowledge, there are at least 3 new books that are being translated as we speak, and hopefully they will be published soon, and they're being translated by young and talented translators, Max Lawton and Anna Aslanyan. No wonder also that the writer of this scale and scope draws the attention of scholars, right? And there are several. I will show only a few scholarly publications about Sorokin. So we see one of the first, if not the first volume about Sorokin, appeared in 1999, and it was edited by Dagmar Burkhardt. Then in the 2010s, Tina Rosa and Dirk Kufelman first ran the first conference, second conference on Sorokin, and published the volume Vladimir Sorokin's Languages. And then Evgeny Dobrenko, Ilya Kalinin, and me, we collected the volume это просто буквы на бумаге. Vladimir Sorokin после литературы, these are only letters on paper. Vladimir Sorokin after literature, where we collected articles from other volumes that haven't been translated into Russian, and commissioned a lot of new articles, and that has been published in 2018. And a few months ago, Academic Studies Press, the same Academic Studies Press that is also playing an important role in the Borderline School, published the first English language monograph about Sorokin. Dirk Uffelman wrote this monograph. It's a companion, Vladimir Sorokin's Discourses, and you can see its table of content where each chapter is dedicated to one of Sorokin's novels, and it provides really a very important guide to Sorokin's oeuvre. And I believe that now Sorokin will be much more open for the next wave and the next level of critical interpretations coming from our students and from younger scholars, and probably not only in Slavic studies. And by the way, here on the cover, Dirk used the painting by Sorokin, and Sorokin, as you know, has been working as a graphic designer since his youth, and now he returned to painting and produces a number of visual images. Certainly, this survey of his work and works about him is incomplete. I missed quite a few other works, but I think it gives you the feel of the scope of Sorokin and the scope of his work and his imagination. So what is very important about Sorokin is that he primarily works with the, not by, so as you know, there are writers who invent their worlds basing on stories, and there are writers who invent their worlds basing on words and language. So Sorokin definitely belongs to the latter category, right? And his experimentation begins in the late 70s within the circle of Moscow conceptualists. And in certain ways, many ways, he is faithful to the path that he had selected back then. I wrote about this, and I apologize before those who are familiar with my article on this subject, but I'm going to use some of its ideas and then move a little forward. So I believe that, and here I'm summarizing ideas that have been expressed by many scholars, Dirk Kuschelman included, and many others. I have introduced the term kernelization, which is from the Latin carnalis, flesh of kernel, and my idea, as I said, not incredibly original, is that this is Sorokin's own distinctive method of deconstruction that he applies to authoritative discourses, symbols, and cultural narratives, right? And the nature of this discourse is quite simple. He transforms verbal concepts into corporeal images, or translates discursive implications and rhetorical presuppositions into a language of bodily gestures, right? Sometimes it's called the literalization of metaphors, but I think that Sorokin goes further than just literalizing metaphors. He gives them flesh. He gives them body. He makes language corporeal, right? And that's he is very much reflective of this principle, of this central device of his prose. For instance, he said back in 1996, more than a quarter century ago, I work constantly with liminal zones where the body invades the text. For me, this borderline between literature and corporeality was of foremost importance. As a matter of fact, my texts always raise a question of literary corporeality, and I try to resolve the problem whether literature is corporeal. I enjoy the moment when literature becomes corporeal and non-literary. I want to draw your attention to this last phrase. I enjoy the moment when literature becomes corporeal and non-literary. So this transition, this illusionary transition, of course, from literature, from the field of discourses to the field of bodies, is imagined by Sorokin as the negation of literature. But is it indeed? I don't think so. I think it all happens in the space of literature nevertheless. So he creates this explosive tension between the development of literature by negating its discursive power and by replacing it with corporeal imagery, right? And in my article, I wrote about several types of kernelization that Sorokin uses. One of them is direct kernelization, which is indeed corresponding to materialization of verbal metaphors. For example, many of you remember his famous early book, The Norm, which I think is an encyclopedia of late Soviet underground creative devices, right? And I'm looking forward to its translation in English, which is a challenge for a translator, of course. And as you remember, there are several parts in this book where metaphors are transformed into the direct imagery. One of them are titled verses and songs, where Soviet songs are transformed into the images, and golden hands of a boy are melted for the mechanism in the clocks for the mechanism on the top of the Palace of Soviets, and the heart that the sailor left with the girl sits in the jar and pulsates on the table of the police station where the girl brings this heart. Right. Of course, the central metaphor of this book, the norm, which is processed feces that Soviet people have to eat every day and eat in different circumstances, is also a realization of the verbal metaphor that you have to eat a load of shit before you can achieve something, right? So it's pretty clear and open, but we can see that Sorokin from time to time uses this device in his later work. For instance, in his script for the film Moscow 2000, there is an episode when one character is inflating the other character by the outer pump, right? And as Alexander Genis noticed, that the realization of the idiom about crooks who are cheating each other. Один жулик надул другого, right? Here we also see this metaphor, realization of metaphor, for example, in his 2010 novel or novella, The Blizzard, where the verbal metaphor from the horsepower as a description of the power of the engine, horses, how many horses do you have under hood, are transformed into real little horses who are pulling the sledge. In the Sugar Kremlin 2008, the metaphor of the sweetness of power, basically borrowed from the line by Mandelstam, is translated into the image of the Sugar Kremlin, which each character licks. And to this licking of the Sugar Kremlin, as noticed by Nariman Skakov, appears to be the transformation of the norm, the processed feces that his characters were consuming in the early prose. Now it's sweet and sugary, but the nature of this process is still the same. I mentioned Blizzard already. Indirect realization is more complicated, right? And it is built on the materialization of the hidden discursive logic, hidden discursive power, something that is not on the surface of the idiom, but has to be unearthed, has to be exposed. And Sorokin uses various means, from gibberish to the shocking acts of violence, to expose the hidden potential of the authoritative discourse. And here, of course, we can see his power of the writer who can mimic authoritative discourses so much that we fall under the spell in order to be later shocked by the exposure. And in his first collection of short stories, the first Subotnik, 1979-84, he called the text including this collection little literary bombs, because the first half of this story, or sometimes 3/4 of the story, is written in the very boring style of the Soviet literature, mediocre Soviet literature from, as Sorokin used to say, provincial press. It's not even socialist realism. Sometimes it's socialist realism, sometimes it's not. But it is some kind of the cultural norm. And then at a certain point, this culturally normative narrative about a teacher and school children, about the Komsomol meeting, about the funeral of the old good man, turns into something very shocking, into some kind of a ritual that typically, as I said, involves excrements, blood, violence, and Sorokin quite intentionally wants us to not to feel well while reading these stories. He wants to trigger the somatic reaction, and that's exactly what his colonization is about. He creates images so powerful on the physiological level that you want to vomit. And Sorokin writes that vomiting is not that bad. a purific reflex is not necessarily bad. It purifies the organism. Purifies from what? Purifies from the discursive dependencies. Purifies from the hypnotic dependence on the norm, basically, right? On the normative cultural hegemony, right? And by this means creates certain sense of liberation. I would say that this is very technical, though we typically treat Sorokin as one of the leading postmodernist writers, and he is a postmodernist writer, of course. But this very technique harkens back to surrealism, right? And in this respect, Sorokin connects Russian postmodernism with surrealism that, as we know, didn't develop very well in Russian culture, but Marcel Duchamp appears in his books from time to time as a very important reference, for example, in The Norm. We can see how this mechanism works in his most scandalous novel, Голубое сало, The Blue Lard, the novel of 1999, and the novel that triggered the aggressive reaction of the pro-government youth organization that was throwing Sorokin's books into the big plastic toilet that they installed next to Bolshoi Theater. And here we have three levels of narrative. There is a level of narrative associated with the future and production of clones. There is a level of narrative that is associated with some kind of retro utopia of the sect that escaped into the depth of the woods and lived this pre-modern lifestyle. And then we have the third utopian narrative, the narrative of alternative history, in which Hitler and Stalin are ruling the world after World War II. Right, so there are three utopias, right? Techno, futuristic utopia, utopia of conservative reversal of history, and utopia of alternative totalitarianism, right? And they are all connected by the image of the blue lard. The blue lard is a sort of mystical image, but as we understand from the plot, it is a byproduct of literary work. Right, in the first part, the clones of great Russian writers are created, and while writing their text, they produce this blue lard that scientists accumulate and that travels across times and across utopias. And here comes the fourth level of this book, the level of the writings of these authors, which are sometimes hilarious, and Sorokin creates his stylization and sort of deconstructions of Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, on the one hand, Chekhov, and Soviet writers in a diapason from Simonov to Pasternak, right? And many people were very offended by this text, but they are incredibly funny and they are incredibly liberating from the feeling of the canon, or from the pressure of the canon and pressure of the authority, right? But certainly there is a very important message that all kinds of utopia that appear in this territory, they are united by this attraction to the blue lard, that Alexander Genis, for example, calls the Russian Graal, right? It is the substance that is not affected by any external influences, right? It's not changing. It's some kind of the essence of the Russian literature. It's the warranty of its eternity. So every utopia, wants to build its power upon this mystical force, upon the force of literature, right? However, in all three major episodes, we see how this attempt fails, right? How the blue lard is being taken away by the competing utopia and passed along, leaving basically devastation and destruction behind. In the end of the novel, and the novel, I remind, is written in 1999, blue lard is being transformed into commodity in the consumerist future that basically is the future of techno-utopia that appears in the first part. And blue lard serves as the material for the gown that a young hero puts on for the Easter ball, right? It is the downplayment of the myth of great literature. So just a gown, just decoration, just consumer is good, right? But at the same time, the Easter ball suggests, as usual, resurrection. So Sorokin, at one and the same time, undermines literature as the Russian religion and Russian religious power, right? And resurrects it, tries to resurrect it. And I will try to continue this idea furthermore. But here in this text, through multiple parodies and multiple mockeries, we see how the devastating power of spirituality, so to speak, of Russian literature comes to the front, and that's I think the effect of colonialization, because certainly all and I'm not going into detail, but there are quite graphic and wonderful in their own good. All the grotesque effects are associated with the body. And one of the most scandalous scenes is the sexual act between alternative Stalin and alternative Khrushchev, for example. He continues this process of deconstruction of authoritative discourse in his subsequent novel, Roman or novel, and here we have to use both words because Roman is the name of the central character, but novel and the death of the novel is what Sorokin displays there. And here he plays mainly with one style, the style of Russian classical novel continuing the tradition of Turgenev or Goncharov. And first 100, or actually more than 100 pages are very much stylized as the novel of the 19th century, and one would be surprised by the fact that it had been written in the end of the 20th century. But of course, the surprise will be replaced with another surprise when Roman will start killing each and everyone in the novel, and in the end he will kill himself, and the last phrase will be that Roman umер, the novel is dead, or Roman is dead. The ritual of sort of multiple sacrifice is what unfolds in these last pages of the novel. Sacrifice that is also blasphemous and, of course, devastating. And this sacrifice reads as a metaphor of revolution or metaphor of the explosive power hidden in the most peaceful forms of Russian literature. The novel is a bomb that explodes, and it explodes right in front of our eyes, along with the Russian cultural tradition. How to interpret this? And we can continue with these examples. I just wanted to give you a few ones. Sorokin himself interpreted this in quite contradictory manner. So here you can see three quotations from Sorokin. In one of them, 1992, he basically assigns corporeal power to the text, to the literary text. And this, I wouldn't even say that it's just corporeal, it's a magic power, right? Text is a powerful weapon. It can hypnotize, and sometimes it paralyzes, right? So the text can affect your mind and can affect your body. The text is, as we would say later, a narcotic. The text is the tool in the hands of a shaman. But at the same time, when attacked for his brutality and for the use of sins of violence and gore and obscenities, Sorokin routinely responded, on paper one may allow himself to do anything, it will tolerate everything. God's word wasn't on paper, but how does it connect with what he said in 1992? In a way, he still wants to reproduce the work of God's word. He wants to reach effects, achieve effects that are beyond the space of paper, that are in the reader's mind and even the reader's body. So Sorokin is sort of in between the using of incredible powers of the literary text and negating its effect. Right? And I don't think that he is not sincere in one of the statements. He combines both. Yes, his text is very playful, but while being very playful, yes, it produces very strong effect on the reader, and through the reader, it changes the perspective, right? So Sorokin himself compares this work with the work of a sculptor. For me, it's a pure, I immensely enjoy myself while playing with different styles. For me, it's a pure plaster job. Words like clay, I can physically feel how I sculpt the text. When they ask me, how can you torture people like this? I respond, these are not persons, these are just letters on paper. This is 2003, and you can see how these two theses come together. On the one hand, words like clay, words are material, words have the substance, right? And on the other hand, they're just not people, they're just letters on paper. Not quite. So his explanations are contradictory by default. So we need to find some others. So one of possible interpretations, there are many of them. I should tell in advance, but I will introduce you two of them. One is have been formulated by my friend and colleague Ilya Kalinin, who writes about Sorokin's work as a metalingual utopia. Right, and Ilya thinks that Sorokin's texts are always about a victory of language in a non-representational mode. What does he mean? He means that Sorokin tries to transcend language as it had been historically shaped, language as the reflection of the reality. He wants to turn language into the reality. He wants to sculpt language as real thing, right? By this means, he basically reinvents the language. He escapes from history. He tries to create some kind of the language before signification, language that is the thing that it refers to. Surprisingly enough, that this desire, this interpretation, corresponds to the famous definition of estrangement or defamiliarization or остранение by Viktor Shklovsky, who wrote that the point of остранение is to make stone stony, right? So is to return the feeling to things. And Ilya Kalinin is one of the leading experts in Shklovsky, definitely knows this explanation and definitely uses it. However, for Shklovsky, that wasn't an escape from history. For Sorokin, it is an escape into a different history, alternative history that doesn't remember itself, according to Ilya. I love this theory, but I can find multiple counter arguments against it, and the fact that Sorokin constantly changes his style in relation to the changing context, right? Moving from Soviet style to classical literature and classical canon, and then to this new forms of archaization that we can see in the day of Oprichnik, and then to the language of today's media, as we can see in his latest works, first of all in the White Square, suggests that he is not escaping history, that he is exploring history. Right? However, there is something that goes beyond the deconstruction, beyond the satire. It's exactly as he said, his enjoyment from playing with words, right? His enjoyment of demiurge, right? He calls himself a stylistic protean, and I would define this tendency as protean vitalism, because Sorokin, surprisingly, is trying to revitalize everything that he touches upon. And the main principle of this revitalization is indeed kernelization that produces embodiment, right? Abstract categories are becoming vital. They are filled with two main energies, either erotic or abject, but both of them are cannot leave you indifferent. They are starting to live their own life, right? At the same time, we can feel the pleasure of mimicry and the pleasure of metamorphosis that the invisible author experiences. And of course, Sorokin is a author who dons multiple masks, but we always can feel when he enjoys the stylistic mask that he is wearing, right? So by this protean vitalism, he replaces the deadly force of abstractions with affects, right? He is creating the style or method of writing based directly on manipulations of affects. We can say that every writer manipulates affects, but Sorokin tries to streamline this manipulation and tries to create some American or Russian hills by moving from very abstract categories to very strong affects that they produce. And this protean vitalism explains why throughout his entire work we can see the development of motifs associated with food and violence. And in 1999, in the Blue Lark appears the motif of drugs, then which then remains in his writings. So it's more or less logical, if not the contradictions that are becoming more and more obvious in his works of the 21st century. The paradox here is that on the one hand, as I showed in my examples, Sorokin continues to use the same arsenal of devices of kernelization, but at the same time, he creates a number of contradictory devices, a number of contradictory effects associated with kernelization. Right? So a few examples. For example, in his early work, the 30th Love of Marina's 30th Love, written in the early 80s, appears something that we may call the reverse of kernelization, which I suggest to call disembodiment, right? The transition from corporeal to non-corporeal, from corporeal to discursive, right? And we see it in the plot development, right? When the central character, protagonist, Marina, a free spirit living in the late Brezhnev's Moscow, falls in love with the partorg of some factory who looks as a spitting image of Solzhenitsyn at the same time, right? And for the first time, she experiences orgasm with him. But after this, we see this transformation of Marina, and the text about her, which pretty soon slides into the long official discourse, very much reminiscent of those most boring and sort of absolutely meaningless articles published in the Soviet press, published by Pravda. So this discourse reflects the transformation of Marina, who becomes the poster girl of socialist realism, and absolutely becomes invisible. So she disappears in front of our eyes. Her body disappears. She's completely absorbed by this stream of senseless discourse. So this is basically here. It was the at least in my reading, the transformation of the person affected by the dead ideology, by the dead letter of ideology, right? We can see similar disembodiments in other works of Sorokin. But when we read his Ice trilogy, we see this process, and it's very much similar, right? And especially when the characters undergo their transition into the brothers of light, and when they sort of discover that belong to the chosen sacred number of 23,000, their corporeality fades away. They spend time in the exalted state of mind, but completely asexualized, right? And Sorokin reproduces this transformation here with the very ambivalent, if not very positive, coloring as indeed the story of people who go against meat machines, right? So for him, the existence different from the existence of these brothers of life is defined, not for him, for his characters, I would correct myself, is defined as a life of meat machines, as a life that sort of doesn't deserve compassion or even slightest interest, right? We may call that this position is, we may say that this position is very, very far from humanism, but Sorokin never declared to be a humanist. However, it is some strange twist in Sorokin's work, right, where he explored the totalitarian ideology, I would say totalitarian, racist ideology, and explored with all his mimetic power. He sort of was absorbed into it, and it took time before he could step back from it. And I think that the Day of Their Preaching that followed the last novel of this trilogy is the response to this ideology, is the sort of the realization of a similar ideology in practical ways of Russian history. However, the Day of Their Preaching is more complicated than it seems to be, because it displays a number of contradictions. For instance, as those of you who read it remember that there are multiple violent sins of violent sex and sadistic violence that are addressed against outsiders and that serve for the unity of a preaching, including rape, including murder, right? And by this means the collective body of the preaching is shaped. But at the same time, we can see that the very same violent acts are used for individual pleasure, although they are defined in this case as crimes. In the case of Count Urusov, where we see in the first sin the combination of rape and arsony, fire, during the pogrom that opprichniki do towards the state official who had been under repression. And then we learn about similar entertainments of the Count Urusov. At one station, it forms collective body. At another station, it is the unforgivable crime for which Urusov is killed at the end of the novel. Collective transgressions and there are many of them, from drugs to violence and corruption, of course. They manifest the sacredness of power. Right? Oprichniks belong to power which is outside of the laws they are supposed to defend and promote, and therefore they can do what others cannot. Right? But also these acts of transgression, especially when it comes to drugs, they manifest freedom, and we cannot ignore this as well. So violence here appears as the most effective manifestation of this freedom, sacred power taken together, right? And I find very informative, very illuminating the illustration by Yaroslav Schwarzstein, who imitates the structure of the Orthodox icon with its labels on the perimeter, and that reflects actually the narrative in this scene of prayer in the Cathedral of the Dormition, when the central character prays to God, prays to power, and recollects the acts of violence. They are interconnected, but they are also interconnected with the freedom. The same can be said about the discourse of corporeality. On the one hand, Kamiaga is very much angry about his colleagues reading obscene fairy tales from Afanasyev collection. So he's against the carnalization. And on the other hand, we see at least two scenes where carnalization serves to the unity of the collective body of Oprishina, the scene of caterpillar, and the scene of drilling of the feet. Right. Also, with the drugs, the use of drugs in this and later novels, later texts of Sorokin is quite paradoxical, right? Very much like the Blue Lard, where drugs are legalized. Many drugs are legalized in the day of Oprichnik, right? And Sorokin himself says that before the revolution, cocaine was sold in Russian pharmacies in the new Russian state, in the Blue Lard, and the day of Oprichnik. This is a compensation for the Iron Curtain. We deprive you of the West, that forbidden fruit, but we are giving you this instead. You don't need any West. Go to a pharmacy and buy cocaine. You will be happy, and in the West, all this is forbidden. So here in this description, drugs appear as the surrogate freedom. But read his own confession. I'm engaged in literature because since my childhood was addicted to this drug. I'm a literary addict like you, but I also can cook these drugs, which not everyone can do. And we see how the use of the so-called little fish in the Oprichnika leads to the production of the collective dream, which Sorokin describes in the style of Russian Belin, style of the epic tale, right? In the novella Meteor, the Blizzard, drugs are appearing as very complicated portals into the land of imagination, right? And since this entire text is built on references to Russian 19th century literature and specifically to Tolstoy, we realize when we read how Dr. Garin consumes these pyramids. You can see the pyramid on the Russian cover, how he lives through the emotions and dynamics that the literary text suggests. Literary text very similar to the one that Sorokin's writes. It's very much metafictional and outer reflective. So drugs indeed function as literature. Furthermore, in Sorokin's probably most ambitious novel, Telluria, 2013, he describes the world after the end of the world, right? So he describes Eurasia and mainly Russia that broke into multiple microstates. There are 50 chapters, and there are less than 50, but about this number of states that each of them depicts. And these states all experience a different linguistic regime, right? They all use different discourses, right? But what unites them is the power of Tellurian nail that has to be hammered into the head by an experienced operator who is called the blacksmith. But the effect of this nail is the effect of literature, is the effect of art. You are experiencing something as if you are there, right? You are living through the imaginary world with all fullness of feelings and suffering and joy, etc. And at a certain point, one of Sorokin's characters finds himself next to Jesus Christ. Sorokin goes as far, right? And from this perspective, we understand that he blurs the borderline between dystopia and utopia. That his Telluria, his world united by Tellurian nails, is the world post-apocalyptic, yes, indeed, but at the same time, it is the world of happiness. And one of the characters says, you know, what the power of Tellurium is about. It agitates in our brain most intimate desires, most valuable dreams, but dreams that have been thought through, deep, profound, as opposed to impulsive pangs. All known narcotic substances drive us behind, forcing on us their desires, their will, and their ideas of pleasure. But Tellurium, divine Tellurium, offers neither euphoria, nor a spasm of pleasure, nor a rainbow-colored high. Tellurium offers you a whole world, solid, truthful, and life. And this description is basically sort of going against colonization, because it is the drug, it is the substance that creates the world. It's not the it's what literature does. It works only in the auto-reflective way, but not in the usual way at all. In Monaraga, Sorokin goes even further, right? Because this is the novel, the main premise of which is that books are being used for cooking, and its narrator is the grill chef who cooks different dishes using different books, and Sorokin, of course, uses his brilliant talent of the style mimic to describe the scenes that this cooking episodes produce, right, in connection with the text that being cooked, right. However, the plot of this novel pushes us towards the realization that the books are burned not because they are not valued, not at all. The books are burned because they are valued as the sacred object, because they have to be sacrificed, right? And that's where the process of destruction turns into the process of construction of the new sacred that is being built on the ruins of culture, because sort of on a timeline, the action of Monaraga happens even after Telluri. It's even later in the future, right? And the only danger that Sorokin sees there is the moving away from singularity of this sacrifice, transforming this into a commercial enterprise where the clones of books are being burned by thousands in industrial ovens, right? So the destruction of literature produces the sacred, but its antipode is associated with cloning. And clones appear in Sorokin's works very frequently. We can see them in the uh, screen the first film of Ilya Krashenovsky, now famous by his Dao. We can see it in the Blue Lord, right? We can see it in the Rosenthal Children, and clones are horrible. Clones are meaningless, but clones are very much corporeal, right? So clones are corporeality that doesn't liberate, isn't it? Yet at the same time, these very clones can produce music, can produce literature, and can produce values that are more than corporeal. So what I'm trying to say is that Sorokin is accumulating contradictions in his later narratives, and my understanding is that these contradictions are all gravitating towards the theme of the new sacred, right? And in this respect, Sorokin is similar to George Agamben, who argues that modern society doesn't abolish sacred life, but rather shatters it and disseminates it into every individual body, making it into what at stake in political conflict. So Sorokin looks for various manifestations of the sacred that he detects in the unforeseen areas, in the areas that we rather qualify as blasphemous or destructive, but he constantly says the dialectics of the destruction and creation of blasphemy and faith into the sacred, right? And to sum up, Dirk Uffelman ends his book by calling Sorokin classic in his own lifetime, and indeed he is already a classic at 65, a classic that created an absolutely new type of writing, right? And he is in certain way similar to Prigov, and no wonder, because Prigov was one of the first writers who noticed Sorokin and approved what he was doing, and so basically Prigov is his literary father. Prigov, as we know, also created an individual style by not having an individual style, and it's a paradox that is very close to Sorokin, as Evgeny Buntman once noticed about Prigov. So you are saying that you are writing in somebody else's language, but from the very first line of any of your poem, one would say that is Prigov. We can say the very same thing about Sorokin, although he is constantly using somebody else's languages. The one who read Sorokin would immediately recognize his pen, right? And that is a new kind of authenticity of collage, and authenticity of mosaics, authenticity of manipulation with existing cultural language. Sorokin is also his place and role in literature and in culture in general can be seen through a comparison with Pelevin, and I even have a theory that the old dichotomy of Tolstoy and Dostoevsky is now translated into a dichotomy of Sorokin and Pelevin. Of course, it's half jokingly. I'm not trying to put an equation sign between them, but we all know that's one of those foundational dichotomies in Russian cultural imagination. And those who like Tolstoy typically are not big fans of Dostoevsky, and vice versa. The same can be said about Sorokin, and in this dichotomy of Sorokin Pelevin, we can now recognize a very similar a position of skepticism versus faith in the healthy foundations of life, exaltation versus mundane but still beautiful vitality, and I think that the latter characteristics are more fitting for Sorokin and the former for Pelevin. Surprisingly enough, looking at Sorokin's path, we can see that he arrives to the reinvention of utopia. He and his entire cohort of conceptualists were beginning from the dismantling of utopia, first of all, Soviet utopia. And utopia in conceptualist discourse was treated as the source of violence, right? But now we can see that Sorokin more and more consistently tries to create utopia beyond ideological discourses. Utopia which is associated with vitalism, right, which is associated with the power of literature that is not ruled by ideas but ruled by its sort of plastic potential, right? But this power of utopia is also associated with the sacred. Utopia and the sacred in Sorokin's world are becoming very close to each other. And he constantly plays out the ritual of destruction of literature. But each of these destructions eventually produce the effect of rebirth of literature and rebirth of respect to its power. In Monoraga, it's just very visible, but he does this everywhere. Literature is rejected in order to be reborn. And in this respect, he is not only surrealist, he's not only an heir to surrealism, but also an heir to symbolism. He transforms literature into the ritual that is autoreferential, ritual that is constantly renewing its own medium. And for this, we should be thankful to Vladimir Georgievich Sorokin. Thank you very much.